Okay, so I'm going to skip over some of the obvious things that you've already heard so many times that they're just kind of trite cliches like store water, because there's a lot more to storing water than the act of just storing plastic bottled water. So, for example, who here has bottled water stored at their house right now? House, garage? Okay. Okay. And what kind of packaging is it in? Are these like the 16.9 ounce bottles, the 1 gallon?
When it comes to plastic, the big.
Okay, the individual bottle, 16.9 ounce. And those are the PET plastic bottles. So when did you store those? How many years ago, do you know? Okay.
I try to rotate them every year.
Okay, good, good. Basically with bottled water, the problem with that is the bottles are so thin and they're getting thinner. And they generally have a 5-year shelf life, but Nestle just announced their bottles have a 2-year shelf life. Now, that might be because they want you to just buy more often, but the problem is these bottles are so bad for the environment that one of the responses is to make the plastic thinner, and there's numerous unintended consequences because of that. So I'm not going to tell you not to store water. I'm going to show you what water to store, but more importantly, what you can do to have an unlimited supply of water instead of just a finite, depletable amount that is going to probably fail you when you need it the most because you're not going to have enough, you didn't plan for a long enough emergency, or the plastic itself has degraded and now you have no water and no ability to generate water. So on the screen here is a Sterapen, a Ketadine, a Big Berkey, Purify, and an Nalgene. I'll go into those in more, but just so you get an idea, and if you're watching the video, so you identify them by image. As with the general recommendations to store batteries, matches, and other disposable resources that you cannot replenish when they're extinguished, there's similar bad advice that is given to storing water. And the problems with water, as we just mentioned, are the duration of water storage. So you don't know how long any emergency is going to last. Now there's a generic piece of advice that says store a gallon per person for 2 weeks. So they say generally store 14 days of water at 1 gallon per person per day. Problem with that is you don't know what kind of unexpected needs you're going to have. That's not going to allow you to have enough water for sanitation. When you boil water, you lose a significant amount through evaporation. And 14 days is just an arbitrary number. Nobody knows how long the after effects of an earthquake or ruptured water lines after a fire could last. So it's important to have the ability to generate an unlimited amount of water. And also the risks of PET in plastic bottles. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with that. Phthalates, there's numerous plastics that leach into the water. And the longer the water sits, the hotter the environment, the more the plastics dissolve and get into the water. And bottles are so thin now that they can and probably will be damaged. So if you have to throw some bottles into the back of your car, things are moving around, especially these plastic 1 gallon jugs. I'm going to show you a picture of the water we have in our trailer that almost all of those 1 gallon jugs are ruined. The plastic degraded and they leaked and the shelf is warped. So that is a painful reminder of what happens when you just store water jugs. And it's good that we found these things out now because it's not an emergency. And one of the pieces of advice I gave, sorry, I've been up almost all night adding to this presentation and then realizing it was too long and then subtracting it. So I'm not usually this bad with my words, so give me some slack here. That didn't take as long. You just don't go to the base if you want a good haircut. But going to be so many unexpected needs, and if you just store water, you might have just enough for your immediate family, but you're not going to be able to help any neighbors out. If your pets need extra water, if you spill one of the cans, if something happens, you're really going to be in a bad situation. Not to mention, if you have to go to a hazardous environment to wait in line for water handouts from FEMA or from the California Office of Emergency Services, you're going to be exposing yourself to whatever is in the air. We're going through a pandemic right now. It could be a lot worse. You have to leave the house. You have to use your gas. You have to either walk or use the gas if you have gas, but most of the time the gas stations are going to be out, so that is a dwindling supply. So for something as foreseeable as water, there are a lot better options than just storing some plastic bottles and then waiting for the government to give you what you need, along with all the other thousands of residents in the area. And that's why we prep, because it's not that we don't trust the government, it's that we're realistic, knowing that there's so many government resources, so many government officials, and a far greater amount of needs. And who here's heard of a PACE plan? So that's more of a military acronym. It stands for Primary, Alternate, Contingency, and Emergency. So a PACE plan for water would be, what are you going to use first? What's your first resort? And what would you guys say? Your first resort with?
Bottled, yeah, stored.
Okay. So that's where I have a different opinion from most people. Most people would say use your bottled water first, use your stored water first. And I understand why they say that, because it's easy, it's readily available. But I do the opposite. So I keep the bottled water for the emergency. And it's not that there's any wrong way to do it, but think about a few things, and maybe it might cause you to reevaluate. So when you store bottles of water, and this is the bottle brand that I recommend, Purify, 20-year shelf life, triple filtered, sealed. They're expensive, they're hard to get right now, but 20 years. And it'll last even longer than that. But this is what you want to keep in your garage in a safe environment. Yeah, it's called Purify Emergency Drinking Water, long-term shelf life. With Purify, I wish, but I'm not sponsored by them. I don't get anything. It's just I've tried all the other brands. Most of the emergency water packets that you guys will find are 5 years. The plastic will dissolve. Obviously, the water never goes bad. It's what gets into the water. So for your primary, I would recommend going with the tap, going with what you can get out of the tap first. And what's probably going to happen is there might be a boil water advisory, there might be something over the radio, or you might just figure out the water isn't running. So a couple things you can do at that time. There's a device called a water bob that goes in your bathtub, and that's popular in a lot of the hurricane countries, areas of America where they know it's foreseeable. The emergency is foreseeable. It's not like in California where the earthquake just happens without warning. So you can fill your bathtub using this liner. You don't want to just drink out of the bathtub. And you fill the liner, and it's 100 gallons of water. And then it has a pump, or you can use the pump I'll show you, which is a filter pump. And that gives you a really healthy reserve right away, assuming you don't have to evacuate. And you would use that out of the water bob directly for secondary purposes. So cleaning, washing clothes. But if you're going to drink, then you need to filter and purify. And I'll get into the differences between filtration and purification because they are critical. But primary would be not to use my precious bottled water yet. I would use what comes out of the tap first, and whatever I can get, I would filter through something like this. And this is called the Berkey water filter, some call the Big Berkey. And this is probably the most important piece of water filtration I have. So you can do some unspeakable things to this. You can pee in it and drink the water out of it. These guys, no, don't get excited. We're not gonna pee in it and demonstrate. Yeah, like, I got you, Dad. I'm ready. Yeah, I know. No, he's really bad at this aim. Yeah, you can drink the pool water out of it. So it removes chlorine, 99.99% of chlorine. It's one of the only filters that you can actually drink pool water out of. Chlorine. The recommended max for water, because all of our tap water is chlorinated, so don't think of chlorine as a particularly harmful chemical. Below 4 parts per million, it's safe to drink. So the water in your pool, assuming it's not a saltwater pool, you can dechlorinate and drink. And the good thing about having chlorine is it's only going to kill the bacteria, the viruses to begin with, but you just need to burn off that chlorine. Now you can't necessarily boil it, and you can't use chemicals to remove a chemical. You have to filter it. And this is such a powerful filter, the black carbon filters, that it removes, I'll tell you the list in a bit, but it's just about everything you can think of. So you could use the water from the back of your toilet tank. You could use the water from your water heater. Not a tankless, that's going to disappoint you, but your standard water heater, if you still have one of those. Yep. Hot tub, yep. And koi pond, aquarium, if it's fresh water. So you have an abundance of water in your house through your air conditioner. Has anybody ever seen how much water an air conditioner produces? What about a dehumidifier? Does anybody, probably don't have one here, but I bought one just for an emergency because it essentially is a water maker. If you have power in an emergency, a dehumidifier will literally pull water out of the air. And as long as you have power, you'll have unlimited water. And San Diego, it's not like the Florida Everglades, but it's still humid enough to give you a virtually unlimited supply, at least 12 gallons a day easily. Not salt water.
So my pool is salt water.
Yeah, then what does your neighbor have? Yeah. Encourage your neighbors to have some pool parties this year, then test their water. Yeah, so the way it works, it's a good question. So inside, there are these 2 carbon filters, and there's multiple different sizes. This is the smallest filter they make. This is the travel Berkey. They make the big Berkey, the Royal Berkey. It was designed, I believe, by the British military so they could bring water into the field and have immediate filtered water where they were without having to, truck it. Exactly. Crusoe. Yeah, the war has to stop for afternoon tea. Good point. So you put the water in here, and it's painstakingly slow. It trickles down, but as it does, thick in terms of the carbon filtration, that it just makes a small little trickle. And you have to periodically test it. I mean, you don't have to, but it's a good idea to use food coloring, food dye, to make sure that it's red water going in. And so, could I grab the water pitcher for me when you have a chance?
Water pitcher?
Yeah,
There's some
thanks.
pour in
Yeah,
there.
just
Throw
thanks.
that in there.
No.
Yeah, waste of tea. Yeah. So then once it collects in here, then this is the spout, and I keep this over our sink. So every morning, as I'm draining the water out, I just use the expandable hose from the sink, fill it in, basically replace what I took out because it takes so long. It does about 2.5 gallons an hour. So it's a lot slower than a Brita, but
Not for your daily needs, right?
yeah, you just keep it relatively topped off, and you always have plenty of water. But you'll notice that the coffee machine doesn't scale up as quickly. The water just tastes better, and the more you can get away from using plastic water bottles, even if you don't care about the environment, just your own health, that is a significant concern. So 6,000 gallons. Yeah, and you'll know when it's clogged up, when it's time to replace it, because the water just won't trickle at all. So I'll come back to that in a second, you can see. But so then it's about 350, and that includes for that. Yeah, the price keeps fluctuating, for obvious reasons right now. Oh, here we go. Okay. Oh, thank you. All right. So, and the reason I got this travel Berkey is when I go camping, the most of the water I use is for drinking, and I can usually find a creek, a stream, even a pond. And we have, how many water hazards are on San Luis?
One big one on number 14.
Yeah. You guys probably have balls in all of them, but so. Okay, cool. All right, so the travel Berkey is 300. That's less than I paid for it, great. And that should include the 2 carbon filters. And you can add on some accessories to it to remove fluoride if that's a concern of yours. But basically you pour it in. And there's so many things, so many options you could do. You could bring the water in a collapsible water block, and it's used for potable water. Always keep it sanitized and used for potable. Don't ever cross-contaminate. So if you're going to use dirty water in here, then that is always going to be used for your dirty water. Don't put the clean water back in it. You're not going to be able to sanitize it. So keep it marked. Keep it for potable water only. One is dirty, one is clean. So you bring this down to the creek, the river, the pond, fill it up, and when you come back, you can either use the spigot or just dump it into the tap, and then it'll filter through here, and it should be going now. Yeah, yeah. So it's not something you want to just stand there and watch. Exactly, and that's key, right? So good point, Robert. Yeah, and I love Robert here. It seems like I've had him rehearse the questions. And he's asked, does anybody know the difference between water purification and water filtration? You go ahead.
Well, water filtration goes through the whole process of water from end to end, and purification takes out all of the it takes out all the contaminants in there, including viruses, bacteria, and all of that. With filtration, you have to actually do a second stage afterwards to get rid of like chlorinator or whatever to get rid of this bacteria that might still be in the
Yeah, I mean, the way that I understand it, filtration would remove the solid particles, the murkiness, anything that's floating in the water, but the purification kills the bacteria, kills the viruses. There is some overlap, like a really good quality filter. This one is down to 0.01 microns if you use all 3 stages, and that technically would function as a filter and purifier because it does remove viruses. Purification through iodine, through aquatabs, and obviously the most popular one is through boiling. And boiling is a great way to purify water. There's no organism in water that will survive 212 degrees Fahrenheit beyond 3 minutes. So the differential is if you're below 6,500 feet, which we are, then you boil it for 1 minute at a rolling boil. If you're over 6,500 feet, 3 minutes. So if you want to be safe, just always do 3 minutes. Always get it to a rolling boil. And that'll kill all the residual bacteria. It'll even clear up the water in most cases. But you're going to lose water. You need to have power or a fuel source. And what I prefer, keeping in line with the notion of you want things to be infinitely reusable, renewable, rechargeable, is instead of bringing a camping fuel with you, a rocket stove. A rocket stove uses the biofuels that are around you, the twigs, the branches, you break them up, and then you have an unlimited supply of fuel. And you can bring water to a boil just using the twigs and sticks that are around you. And yeah, I have to be careful not to overwhelm you with different options. It's just like layered defenses, essentially. You want to have redundancy. And they say in the Navy, 2 is 1, 1 is none. If you just have one, it's going to fail you, and you might as well have nothing. So to keep it simple, when you're out of the house, have a travel filter. If you have to leave, if you have to evacuate, have some ability to augment what water you've carried with you by having the ability to filter from a nearby stream, a creek, a pond. But if you're at the house, something like the Berkey would be pretty handy because it doesn't require power. A lot of the individual like life straws and things like that, with a life straw, the problem with that, you can't share the water with anybody. It's just a straw. It's only for one person, unless you want to drink it and like bird feed it to your wife. I'm not like, but so have the ability to generate water from within your house. There's really no reason to even leave your house if you have an air conditioner that you can run. Obviously you need power. If you have a dehumidifier you can run, or if you can drain the water from your water tank or from the upstairs pipes. If you open the upstairs valves, the water tends to run down. You'll get water out of the pipes. That's relatively fresh. You probably shouldn't even be drinking water out of plastic bottles even during a non-emergency. And recently, the FDA, which had denied that there was any health risk whatsoever to BPA, there was a Harvard article that came out. This is the link if you're curious. And they found that it's not harmless. It's not a harmless chemical. And then the FDA revised its advice about 3 months after that. So they did a study and they gave students water in a polycarbonate bottle, plastic bottle, and then water in a stainless steel bottle. And then they tested their urine after a week of drinking out of the polycarbonate bottle, and the urine sample showed a 69% increase in BPA levels. So that was in 1 week. So one thing that you should be doing is tracking how much water you and your family use on a daily basis. And an easy way to do that is to leave your house, go camping somewhere, bring the water with you. So you're not getting it from any other source. You're easily tracking. If you take 6 5-gallon bottles and you use 1 bottle per day, and that's pretty consistent, then you're going to need 5 gallons for your whole family per day. So just look at the number of bottles, look at the number of days. You can figure out pretty quickly what the average amount of water is per day. And that's why you want to go camping. So many reasons. And this is why I started doing these little clinics. I reserve a spot at either San Elijo or South Carlsbad Campground, and I take a family if they want to go, or if they want to just do a small group, and we'll either do it for the day or we'll do an overnight. And I'll show you, in addition to what you already know, here's why you want freeze-dried foods. Here's what the different ones taste like. They're actually pretty good. Here's how to rehydrate them. Most people just think about water they're going to need for drinking, but you're going to need it for dishwashing. You're going to need it for obviously your pets, clothes, and that all comes out of your daily allotment. My main issue with it is the shelf life of bleach. It's so short. It's less than a year. It's usually around 6 months. The bleach will smell totally like bleach, but it might have lost all its disinfecting capability. So you have this false sense of security, and you can make yourself really sick. But if you are going to use it, I'll talk about the advice. It's 8 drops. So keep a dropper bottle if you do want to use bleach. 8 drops per 1 gallon, but just make sure, like you guys said, cycling it out, constantly using it. So, if you just store, oh, hey, Christine. And I have a koi pond too, so if you have a non-saltwater pool, I'll trade you my koi water for your pool water. And the great thing about koi ponds, similar to aquarium, is that they're not going to be heavily chlorinated because it'll kill the fish. You can tell usually the health of the water by the health of the fish, but it's going to require, obviously, purification, filtration. Definitely filtration, especially if you're going to filter an aquarium, because there's all that bacteria, all the residual waste from the fish. But if you have a good quality filter, it's going to filter all those solid particles out. And then if you purify the water, either through boiling, chemical disinfectant, a UV Steripen like Matt and I talked about, then you're going to have the best of both. It's like belt and suspenders, extra safe. So another way to not have to go outside your home to get water. And I'm going to try to wrap this up quickly. There's more I wanted to talk about the fish tank, but we're going over time. Another advantage to living in this area is that there's so much quote unquote low-hanging fruit that you should take advantage of. So cactus, and forgive me if I say cactuses if that's not true, but the dictionary says it is allowed. So I researched that. This was one of the things I was doing at 3:45 this morning. So cactuses. And you were the high school teacher? Okay, yeah, it is. Okay, so these prickly pears are all around us, but they will really mess up your hands if they look harmless, but use some gloves. And it's an outstanding source of vitamin C. They have medicinal properties. This isn't like a nature walk, but I did hire a guy to come out here to walk with me throughout the community and identify only edible plants and flowers. And just within the village green here, we found 13. So one thing you can do with your kids, with your family, is when you go hiking, when you go camping, there's an app that'll identify any plant. And one of them is called Plant Snap. So you can, if you don't have cell signal, just take a bunch of pictures of whatever plants that you identify. And then when you get back at home, the app using AI, and it's all done offline or in the cloud, it'll identify just with the picture what that plant is, and then you can research whether it's edible or not and what the medicinal properties are or not. So utilize what's literally in your backyard. And these are going to be some real quick tips, because I know you're not going to necessarily have to use these, but it's better to at least hear it, knowing that you're probably not going to need it, rather than shield you from it because it might sound so outlandish. But one way to probably locate water in most cases is to look at where birds are flying in the morning and the evening. They tend to fly towards water, and birds are exceptionally good at identifying moving water, whereas insects will tend to gather towards stagnant water. And given the choice between pooled stagnant water and moving water, you'd obviously want to choose the moving water. So the insects are an example of a problem with benefits, and I don't think that's a phrase the kids use these days. But the problem is that insects are annoying. The benefit is that they tend to show you where the water is. And another problem with benefits is that if you were in a really bad situation where you're away from civilization, you had to evacuate, you're all by yourself, there's no noise, there's no sounds, there's no human contact, one of the things you can do is just head downhill if you're looking for water. Water flows and collects downhill. Another thing you can do is listen. It's going to be very quiet. Listen for the birds, listen for the insects, and then listen for the sound of flowing water. Water outside your home. Animal tracks are a great way to figure out where the water is, especially if you see like popular animal routes. They tend to know where the water is. Whenever you're in a new environment, look at what the native experts are doing. In this case, it's the animals. And you all know that dogs have a heightened sense of smell, but I didn't realize it was this extreme. So the average human has 6 million receptors for smell in their nose. The the dogs, like especially bloodhounds and I think poodles, have up to 300 million. And they also have a nose that stays wet, so it keeps those particles in there so their dog brain can analyze it for a much longer period. And thirdly, the part of the brain that analyzes smells is 40 times larger in dogs than it is in humans. So just gives you an example of like how animals have capabilities we can't even comprehend. So utilize what's in the environment, you know, the animals and then the natural features, and you'll never run out of water. And then a trash bag is profoundly important, a contractor bag specifically. Keep a roll of that in your car. Keep several of those in your emergency kit. They have so many uses. They're a tarp, they're a ground cover, they're insulating. You can wear them as a poncho. You can, you know, make an awning, but you can collect water. So similar to how we talked about making that distillation, you can hang it. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say on those, it's not just any trash bag. If you go to like Costco or whatever, you can get the 3 mil ones.
Yes, yes.
Those are like, those
Perfect, yes.
Yeah, those are
You-
thick, heavy duty.
Yeah.
You're not gonna be worried about getting holes and punctures on it.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, something that's strong, resilient. I prefer the ones with the handles. We could probably do trash bag talk for another hour, but I don't think anybody wants to listen to it, but yeah, your favorite trash bag. And these came in handy just, earlier this month when we didn't have trash service. So, you know, having these at the house was handy. But for emergencies, you would basically just open it up, create a square, and you would collect rainwater. You could also use it for plant transpiration. You know, plants exude moisture, and you can collect the water with that. There's morning dew. You can collect water in a still. There's so many things you can do. And pros and cons. We talked about the Berkey, for obvious reasons, is my favorite, but it's not as easy to transport. That's the travel Berkey. And you know, Chris, we were talking about like how to purify water from your pool, from pond, whatever. That'll do everything. And if you buy an extra set of the carbon filters and don't open them, then it'll last pretty much forever. So you'll have that backup. Don't open them till you need it. And this is the survivor filter, so that's something that you would take with you if you have to leave the house. This is the rocket stove if you need to cook or purify. That's what you want to look for bleach. Sodium hypochlorite concentration between 5 to 9%. Other countries, the concentration is different. And that's why bleach is kind of risky, because it's not as precise as using a UV sterilization pen where it's very standardized. It lets you know when it's done. The shelf life is so short that you really just can't store it. You have to just take it out of your laundry room that you've been using. This is the solar still. There's a video, but we don't have time to go over that. And then lastly, how I can help. I do home audits. Laura mentioned this at the beginning. I can help you figure out what you're deficient in, help you figure out what you should add, how to test it, you know, test it to the point of failure, because you want to fail safe. You want it to fail in an environment where you can procure an alternative, not when everything's closed, the gas stations are down, the shops have been closed or looted or whatever. Things are already getting bad now, and this is normal environment. Nothing bad has happened, really. COVID's bad, but the supply chain is still intact. It doesn't take much imagination to think how quickly and how drastically things could get bad. So now is the time you want to be testing these things. I also make survival kits. These are all the different types of kits that I sell. I do have an all-in-one bug out bag, but I prefer these individual kits because you can augment what's in your bug out bag by knowing that, like, I want to have extra charging capability. So this will have, you know, the AC charger like this, and you know, one of these has the cables built in. It has 2 USB-C, 1 AC outlet, 2 USB-A, a wireless charger. You can charge it from solar. You can charge it from your car. You can charge it, and USB is fantastic because it's DC to DC. It's not wasteful like an inverter is, where you have to go from DC to AC. That uses a tremendous amount of heat and energy just in the inversion process, so you're losing that. So anytime you can get a USB device, opt for it, because that gives you the ability to charge directly from solar. And if you're going to charge from your car or from your house, it's much more efficient. And when you travel, you don't have to worry about voltage conversion. It's just USB. The car you rent overseas is going to be 12 volt. The hotel is going to have a 12 volt. So USB is the way to go. And then if you're interested in a clinic, I haven't done any here yet, but I'd be happy to do some if somebody wants to just do a little field trip. And we'll cook, we'll do water, we'll do solar generation. And it's fun to do with the family.
I think it's a great thing with family or grandkids or
Yeah.
you don't know what to do with them. I mean, this is
Just
what a
give them the
fun
neck
thing
for
to
the
do.
day.
Huh?
Yeah.
Or give them their
Yeah,
grandkids.
here, take them. Yeah. This concludes the presentation. I hope you found it helpful, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hope you get some sleep.
I'm glad I stayed awake for the whole thing. Yeah.
That was,